Mike, I find it funny looking at X to see all the different people that were like, I'm shocked that Joe Biden, the public servant, the good man, the loving father, I'm shocked that he would have lied and said, I won't pardon Hunter. And then he did.
Yeah, so shocking. Well, I think the size and scope of it, though, I think is honestly even a little surprising to me. I mean, it's a 11-year total blank slate, get out of all crimes free card. I mean, I don't know if this is completely unprecedented in all pardons in all of U.S. history, but I've never seen anything like it. This is 11 years from January 2014 to the present day, all crimes, whether charged or not. I mean, he could have murdered someone in between that time, and he's evidently got a pardon for it now. And I think the reason for this wide scope is because what Hunter Biden was doing, as you correctly noted, was essentially selling U.S. foreign policy for the personal profit of the Biden family. That's why, it seems like almost every member of the Biden family has a professional job, almost like in the mafia. It's like they keep it in the blood there so they can share bank accounts, they can keep things close hold, and everyone's got their different parts between Hunter and Jim. I know a lot of people are now expecting, James Biden to receive pardons as well, but the
Yeah,
Hunter
don't you think
one,
he will before Biden's out of office?
it seems highly likely, and it may have the same sort of almost indefinite term. I mean, why not make it 40 years going back? Why stop at 11? I mean, obviously, it's for the reasons that you noted, but I think what's implicated here is something far more vast and deep than Hunter Biden himself or even Joe Biden himself. I think this really gets to the heart of the diplomatic octopus of the U.S. empire, which could potentially create international and diplomatic blowback on the U.S. if these crimes are revealed not just to the American people, but to the international community. I think this is why you have the CIA all over this story. You have the State Department all over this story. You have USAID all over the story. You have the Pentagon all over it. I mean, you mentioned the Ukraine impeachment in 2019. That was led by the effectively the Pentagon through the Vindman brothers and the CIA whistleblower, whose name you were not allowed to say on social media for several weeks,
Yeah,
Eric
remember that?
Ciamarella. Right. And Ciamarella was actually on the email chains about Burisma with Joe Biden directly from the CIA. And if you recall, we have whistleblower testimony to Congress that the CIA actually intervened in the Justice Department intent to do an interview of Kevin Morris, the sugar daddy who paid Hunter Biden's taxes for 5 years consecutively. And when the IRS and the Justice Department sought to get more information about Hunter's financial sponsor, they were waved off by the Central Intelligence Agency. And this really gets to the heart of what Burisma and Hunter Biden are all about. So, on the one hand, there's the personal profit side of it, which is the fact that Hunter was getting personally enriched by his presence on the Ukrainian private energy company, just as he was, for example, in ePlata, which was a microfinancing company to provide banking services to illegal immigrants. He had a almost 10% equity stake in that, Hunter Biden did, at the same time that his father was opening up the U.S. border in order to create a flood of the market for those microfinance transactions. And then on top of that, Joe Biden then used his Justice Department to pressure banks to provide banking services to illegal immigrants. So you basically have a locked in market for the illegal immigrant microfinancing company that Hunter was on. It was doing the same thing with China and the LNG space there. But the Burisma story, I think, activated the FBI in the 2020 election cycle. It activated the CIA. It activated the defense and intelligence spheres because nobody wants the dirty laundry to air on the international stage here. If Russia is able to hold up these disclaimers or these disclosures and these documents and forensically piece it all together, just how corrupt the whole U.S. involvement in Ukraine was, then that provides a powerful forum for Russian propaganda to win hearts and minds in Ukraine, in Central and Eastern Europe, to neutrals like India or to Pakistan, and say, this is what the US has been doing this whole time. They've been using this as their personal piggy bank. And here we have the direct files from the CIA, from the Pentagon, from the State Department. And there's so much more to this, but I think that's what's motivating this need to stop not just pardoning Hunter, but to block a Justice Department investigation into the underlying crimes.
Well, do you think this will actually stop any type of investigation? I mean, like I said, I do expect, you never know for sure, but I do expect Joe Biden to pardon his brother. But there are certainly other people associated with what happened, other people associated with the Biden crime syndicate. Are there enough people who were in the know that there could be congressional testimony? Because one of the interesting parts of the pardon, too, is that if you are pardoned, you cannot plead the fifth if you are called to congressional testimony, for example, because it's not incriminating anymore if you say anything, if you have been given full immunity. So theoretically, Congress could subpoena Hunter Biden, bring him in front of the Congress, and could require him to testify. And if they have some trap where they could prove that he was lying, they could then hold him in contempt. There are mechanisms to try to investigate this. Do you foresee any of that happening? Is there a way for it to be done successfully? How else could Republicans try to uncover this? Because I personally think it is important to still investigate it. It was so significant.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the Senate Intelligence Committee could simply get a gang of 8 together, so to speak, and simply look at all CIA files that have the word Burisma in it. And I guarantee you, if they were to do that, every single one of them would walk out of the meeting white as a ghost in the face from just seeing the sheer scale of what Burisma was being used for both the Biden family and for the U.S. diplomatic corps, because Burisma was being built up as an alternative to Russian gas. That was why you had the CIA and the State Department and USAID all over it, and the Atlantic Council with 7 CIA directors signed a formal partnership with Burisma on January 19th, 2017. That's one day before Trump was inaugurated. The Atlantic Council, with 7 living former number one heads of the CIA on its board, signed a business cooperation agreement. They sort of consider themselves NATO's think tank. And so you have effectively the civilian arm of NATO personally kicking deal flow to Burisma. You have a formal USAID partnership. USAID has long been the sort of civilian finance arm of the Central Intelligence Agency. Yet Hunter Biden, who was on the chairman's advisory board of NDI, the National Democratic Institute, which is a longtime CIA cutout. It was actually created effectively in a letter from the CIA director in 1983, calling to have an NGO set up to do what the CIA used to do. And somehow Hunter Biden ended up being on the chairman's advisory board of that. Right next to Hunter Biden on Burisma, on the board of directors there, was no less than Cofer Black, who spent 30 years in the CIA and won a CIA Distinguished Medal Award. He was Mitt Romney's Sherpa to the intelligence community when Mitt Romney ran against Barack Obama for the presidency there. You had Hunter Biden's own law firm draft a lobbying memo to the State Department, pitching them in 2014 on how useful Burisma would be to the State Department to create, if Burisma could be upscaled and Russia could be sanctioned and the Nord Stream pipelines could be sanctioned or blown up, then Burisma would capture the market that Gazprom used to have. And then, of course, at the end of it, you have all the private sector stakeholders who make billions effectively from capturing the European energy market that they just weeded Russia off. And so you can argue that's in U.S. interest because we've just nuked the economy of a hostile foreign adversary. But who's collecting the profits? It's not the American people. It's the Biden family and their donors like George Soros, who is personally leading the play to privatize Naftogaz, the main feeder that Burisma feeds into. And not only that, what were we doing militarily in Ukraine? You know, this whole war with Russia in Ukraine did not start in 2022. It was 2014 when the U.S. Embassy overthrew the government of Ukraine, the democratically elected government, and then we're not expecting the counter coup when the Donbass broke away and did not respect the new U.S. installed government. There was no vote for Yatsenyuk in 2014. He was installed by Victoria Nuland and Jeff Pyatt, The hot mic conversation of that is freely available online. It's also on my X timeline at Mike Benz Cyber if you want to look that up. But where did Burisma hold the mining rights for the gas that it was exploiting? It was in the Donbass, which had just broken away from Kiev and was now being backed militarily by Russia, and it was in the Black Sea. It was basically offshore of Crimea, which had just declared itself to be part of the Russian Federation in a referendum. And so, what were we doing between 2014 and 2020? Why was there billions of dollars in military assistance going to Ukraine to recapture eastern Ukraine, where Burisma held all of its mining rights, and to recapture Crimea, where Burisma held the offshore gas mining rights? We were sending billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to effectively improve the corporate revenue structure of a company that the previous vice president's son was on, and that the then incoming president would orient his entire foreign policy around. So we used the Pentagon to secure Burisma's investments. We used the CIA to do it. We used the State Department to do it. Hunter Biden personally lobbied the U.S. ambassador to Italy in the U.S. embassy in Rome in order to get Burisma the offshore gas rights in Italy and Greece. We used U.S. aid to secure Burisma's profits. We used NATO to secure Burisma's profits. But it's not the American people who are profiting from this. This was the personal profit of the Biden crime family. And now, evidently, those crimes are off limits because they have a blanket pardon.
And listen, in the YouTube live chat, Ronald Wirtz says Joe Biden is issuing a pardon for himself, essentially. And I think that's correct. Joe Biden, we think of him maybe as shaking hands with the air, not knowing where the stairs are, mumbling to himself, this doddering, senile old man. But truthfully, and this is not hyperbolic, he is one of the most corrupt presidents that our nation has ever seen. And we may not ever know the dollar amount of money that he and his family were able to collect from all of these really hostile adversaries, foreign governments, and interests all around the world. I think too, Mike, that one of the reasons this happened on December 1st versus waiting till January 20th wasn't just the sentencing that was coming up for Hunter Biden. I think one of the pressing reasons was President Trump's nomination of Kash Patel for FBI director. Kash Patel is, I think I would put him, I was thinking about the ranking of President Trump's nomination so far. I think he's at the top. I think this is the best nomination yet. And Trump's had some pretty good ones so far, barring a couple of iffy ones, but pretty good ones. I think Joe Biden issued this pardon of Hunter, knowing it would shield himself because Kash Patel is going to be at the FBI.
That may be. I think Kash represents a potential that is completely astounding. I mean, it's honestly, it renews your faith in humanity that such a thing is even possible. I mean, you had Bobby Kennedy, who wrote a whole book about how HHS is implicated in COVID-19, and he's made the head of HHS after writing that book. You have Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who was deemed a fringe epidemiologist by the NIH and blackballed essentially from almost being cited in any NIH papers, and he's made the head of NIH. And now you have the guy who said if he was made the FBI director, he would shut down the J. Edgar Hoover building and turn it into a deep state museum, being made the head of the FBI. So there's never really been a moment in American history where there's so much opportunity for change and reformation. And frankly, that is the only way these institutions can be allowed to survive, is if they run the gauntlet and do their sort of naked walk of shame, if you will, in order to come out the other side having paid their penitence for their abuse of power. And it's not that you're necessarily going to shut down the FBI. It's not that you're going to shut down the NIH or the HHS. But if they want trust back, they have to come clean, just like any criminal. You do your time for the crime, and it's not a death sentence necessarily. It's not you going away forever. But if you want to return and be a good, upstanding member of society, you have to turn over everything you've done. You have to come clean. You need a big fat apology, and you need to show that you mean it by enduring some sacrifice. And I think that Kash is the perfect person to make the FBI go through that process. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I think it is absolutely imperative that Cash is joined by a deputy director at the FBI and by a chief of staff at the FBI who will make sure he is protected from backstabbing and from end running and all the little tricks and compartmentalized silos that can form these mutinous little factions within the FBI to backstab him. Because you can bet that is what they will be doing well before day one.
And listen, we're going to talk about shortly on the show all the things that Kash Patel plans to do at the FBI. But I want to ask you this confirmation process, whether it's for the people you already mentioned, Dr. Bhattacharya or RFK or Tulsi, certainly for Kash Patel, it's going to be an arduous process, which is a commentary on the state of the Republican Party as well as the Democrat Party. The fact that essentially there's a uniparty in Washington, D.C., because we have a Republican majority in the Senate. These people should just, fly through confirmation. They won't, because the Republican Senate is oftentimes captured by the deep state. There are going to be efforts. We saw it against Matt Gaetz. We're seeing it against Pete Hegseth to discredit them, to assassinate their characters, to disqualify them, to convince mushier Republican senators not to vote for their confirmation. What types of attacks do you anticipate from the deep state will be aimed at Kash Patel during this process?
Oh, there's no bottom to it. They'll probably try to dig up every woman since elementary school Cash has ever texted or made eyes with at a random grocery store. They'll probably. I mean, there's no limit to it. I mean, they'll probably try to do some mishandling classified documents type thing. I wouldn't be surprised if to the extent that Cash has had security clearances for work that he's been involved with. But it's really going to come down to the votes, I think, more than the public opinion scandals, because at this point, I think there's such intensified public support. The cash only, only cash hashtags were, I think, completely dominated X. It appears that Cash has the support of Elon, at least in terms of optimism for his role there. So I think it's really going to come down to the actual floor votes on the Senate. And what people need to know in the Senate is that if they are a Republican trying to block this, that it's going to be effectively the end of their political career if they do so.
Yeah.
That they should take a lesson from Liz Cheney, who was a very, very powerful senator in our Congress, and then got blown out for leading the January 6th Fedsurrection show trial in Congress and voting against Trump and impeachment. And then she ended up getting blown out by 30 points in her own state when it came down to that. I think that example has to be put on a jumbotron so that people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, and even to some extent John Thune, are aware that the American public has a very, very, very watchful eye on them, and that we voted overwhelmingly for President Trump to put these people in to the positions of power that they are now nominated for. And if they seek to use a bureaucratic process or an ethics probe or flat voting against them, the same people, I should note, who all voted to approve the Democrat Merrick Garland, the single most corrupt head of the Justice Department our country has ever seen and likely will ever see. He's probably the most crooked prosecutor, I would say, almost in human history at this point, for the perversion of justice that was done to our great country and completely destroying the name of our Justice Department. And they voted for him. They won't vote they may not vote for Kash Patel. If that happens, that has to be the end of their career in the Senate. And the American people have to make that loud and clear on social media.
Yeah, and by the way, I think you make a good point about the corruption of Biden's DOJ, because we know there's communication, right? Joe Biden pretends that, the Department of Justice is independent. I don't get involved. We know exactly what Joe Biden's agenda was and how it was carried out by the FBI or by the DOJ at large, because while his son was the bagman committing these crimes all around the country, and even up to the point that Joe Biden is pardoning him, the FBI is going after pro-lifers, going after people that are pro-Second Amendment, going after anybody that says the word based, anybody that says the word red pill. They're being labeled as parents who oppose gender ideology in their children's classrooms at school or being called domestic terrorists. This is not only the most corrupt individual who who made himself wealthy and his family wealthy as an individual. He spread this poisonous ideology using law enforcement who have tentacles into every corner of our society, trying to get us if we dissented, if we called him out, if there was a threat of exposure of his son and of their crime family. And we're going to show, by the way, some of the hypocrisy of the left. Adam Schiff specifically, I got to show you guys a video of that. Mike Benz does have another commitment. We're going to have to let him go. You can find him at Mike Benz Cyber on X. Highly recommend you follow him over there. He's got a great X account. Mike, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Liz. Great talking to you again.